Eddie's shift started the same way it always did. Before dawn, fog more like a rumor than weather, the dump's horizon a smear of orange streetlights and sleeping towns. He had the rhythm of it, the clank of the truck, the squeal of the lift, the handfuls of coffee that warmed his palms during the long empty runs. He knew the smells, the small tragedies wrapped in newspapers, the town's broken things and the things people pretended not to see. He liked being useful in a simple way, making the debris of other people's lives go away so the rest of the city could pretend it wasn't there. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and honesty has a way of making mornings feel possible. That morning the route had an extra stop. The county had called in a report about a suspicious load at the old West Side transfer point, where people dragged anything they were ashamed of. Eddie's partner Marco snored in the cab, a sound like tired metal. Eddie climbed down with the kind of patience that comes from years of starting your day when everyone else is still in bed. The transfer point smelled like damp cardboard and old rain. The pile looked ordinary until he circled it and saw the corners of something that didn't belong between mattresses and a broken dresser. He pulled the tarp and felt the odd, small panic that comes when something in the world doesn't belong. It was a coffin, plain, cheap oak with hairline nails. Someone had left it abandoned under a blanket of discarded mattresses. He checked for obvious signs, a driver's tag, an address, anything, but there was nothing. Whoever had brought it here had wanted it to stop existing. The wood looked new in places and scuffed in others, the kind of where a hand leaves when you push a secret just far enough to hide it. Eddie's hands moved on their own. He ran his fingers along the lid. It was unnaturally light for its size. He half laughed at himself. Dead weight, he thought, but that was a joke with no punchline. He dropped a bit of his coffee on the wood and watched it beat and run. The town had always given him ghosts and jokes. Today it gave him a question. He thought of calling Marco, of waking him, of letting somebody in authority deal with whatever this was. He had been working long enough to know there were rules and the rules were meant to be followed. But the line of stitch across the top of a coffin is not just wood, it's a threshold, and sometimes all the rules in the world try to keep you from seeing what waits on the other side. He lifted the lid. A face met him. Not a bloated, obvious corpse, but a body wrapped in something like a shroud, as if someone had tried to erase a person on thrift store fabric. The mouth was slightly open as if midway through a sentence. The skin was the waxy gray of someone who had been forgotten for a while. A thin line of dried blood traced from the temple. Eddie's world focused to a razor. The coffee bottle fell from his fingers and cracked on the ground, the sound disproportionately loud. He slammed the lid shut like you clap the brakes on a car. His hands were shaking, and then the shaking made him furious, angry at himself for being human. He shouldn't have opened it. He should have called. But he had, in a moment that felt like prayer and panic, peeked at what the city had left behind. He could not unsee the face. He backed away and remembered his phone in his pocket like an accusation. 911, he thought. He dialed, voice low, because you never shout when you are close to something you don't understand. This is Eddie at West Side Transfer. I found a coffin. Someone's in it. It looks. I think they're dead. The dispatcher asked routine things: your name, your location, is anyone in danger? And Eddie found his answers clumsy. He told the truth. There was a body. He had opened the lid. He was at the old transfer. Stay where you are, she told him. Don't touch anything. Officers are on their way. The words were crisp, practiced. Eddie looked at the lid he had latched like he had sealed a crime into the earth. He felt a small, foolish guilt, the idea that he had violated a silence. The county patrol lights arrived like a storm of blue. Officers moved through the piles with caution, gloves and flashlights making the transfer point look like a stage set for a very bad play. Eddie stepped back as they freed the coffin from its nest of mattresses and straps. Forensics wrapped in their methodical certainty. Eddie answered questions he had not known he would have to answer. When did he find it? Did he touch anything? Had he heard anything odd? His voice kept breaking at odd moments, surges of memory rising like tides he couldn't hold. They thanked him more than he expected, polite, hollow thanks that sounded like they belonged to another life. A detective named Alvarez came forward and looked at him with the kind of patience that is kind and small. You did the right thing, she said. We need to know everything you remember. He told her about the light, the sound of the coffee bottle, the way the wood had looked new in some places and scuffed in others. He told her he had worked the transfer for 20 years and he had never seen a coffin there before. She nodded with the solemnity of someone holding more than bones. Forensics will take it to the lab, she said. We'll try to identify who it is. If it's a homicide, we'll treat it like one. Thank you, Eddie. The truck left, the forensics van towing with a hum that made Eddie's chest feel hollow. People would say later that the trunk had fingerprints, that there were fibers matching a motel on the edge of town, or that the nails were a particular brand bought at a hardware center near the interstate. All true, but the part of the day that kept replaying for Eddie was a small hush, the quiet between the click of the latch and the face he'd seen. He went home that night unsettled in a way that made sleep impossible. In the dark, you can invent things 1,000 different ways. Explanations tumble into each other and none of them sit comfortably. He saw the face again and again, but sometimes it was younger, sometimes older, sometimes someone who had died by accident and sometimes someone who had been made to vanish. He dreamed of a baby crying in a box of old toys, of a man looking for his wife and finding a tarp. The next morning Detective Alvarez found him on his route. "We identified her," she said without preamble. "Name's Marlene Casper. 52. No family on file. Deceased 2 to 3 months. Cause inconclusive until autopsy, but there are signs of trauma." Eddie felt something like relief at the name. It is a small mercy to be able to put a syllable onto a thing. Marlene. He had the image of her as someone with thin hands who might have worked in a diner, someone who might have liked black coffee and old sitcom reruns. Names make ghosts flip into people. "How did she end up in a coffin here?" he asked. Alvarez's face had the tired architecture of someone who had seen that question more than once. "We're looking into it," she said. "We found paperwork in the lining that linked to a removal service. A caller reported a suspicious vehicle dumping near the transfer earlier the same week. We're reviewing CCTV, motel registries, and disposal receipts. Any odd behavior you saw around the transfer, any trucks? Anything at all could help." Eddie thought and thought. He remembered a late-night U-Haul with a peeled sticker, a couple of kids with earbuds, someone who'd been pacing near the chain link the week before, smoking and watching the road. He told Alvarez and she wrote it down, her pen like a metronome. Days folded into each other and the case grew like mold in a warm corner. The coroner's report told them she had been dead longer than any of them had thought. There were defense wounds, bruises wrapping like a map around ribs, a blunt force injury to the head, traces of sedatives and toxicology. The lab found a grainy photograph tucked in a seam, a little girl on a birthday swing, hair in pigtails, smiling at the camera. The back had a handwritten note, "For Marlene with all my love." The handwriting wavered, but it gave a shape to the life. The town drank it up, the kind of attention that a mystery drags with it. News vans parked near the dump. A reporter with a hairnet tried to make Eddie into a symbol. He wanted to be left alone. He kept working, letting the rhythm of the truck sweep him forward. People sent him messages of thanks and questions and conspiracy theories. Someone claimed they'd seen a lighted figure near the transfer at odd hours. Someone else suggested organ trafficking in a cheap online comment. His inbox filled with versions of the same suspicion. The detours of the investigation led to a room at a motel off Route 9, where a man named Theo had lived for months, a handyman, a man with bad teeth and a habit of fixing every clock he found. He never had family listed anywhere. Theo's name was on a Craigslist listing for removal services that matched the paper found in the lining of the coffin. The motel owner remembered a woman who'd visited him some evenings, a woman with cheap perfume who left before dawn. The woman had given the name Marlene, but the man who delivered the coffin said the job was cash only and he wouldn't ask questions. Police found Theo's pickup with traces of the kind of soil found at Westside and traces of the tarp's fibers. He was arrested. He said he had been hired for a job, that the removal was supposed to be a body donation to science, something arranged through an online group. He gave names of people who never existed, of accounts that died when you looked at them too long. Under pressure, he began to talk about a woman he'd been seeing who'd used Marlene's name but who'd paid in cash and watched too closely when they drove to the transfer. The town wanted a villain, and the story arranged itself in tidy arcs. Single man tricked into dumping a body by a stranger, man arrested, community relieved. But the facts refused to bend. Theo's testimony wavered like a poorly tuned radio. The motel manager's memory had holes. CCTV crackled like old film. Paperwork matched to a funeral home that had closed a year earlier. Eddie listened to each development with a growing unease. The coffin was a hinge on a door no one wanted to open. One evening, 2 months after the find, Eddie was sorting recyclables when his phone rang. It was Alvarez. "We found her sister," she said. "Or what's left of a family line. A brother-in-law in Nebraska gave us records." Turns out Marlene had been missing from official records for years but not from people's memories. She'd been off the grid after a messy divorce, moved around town doing odd jobs. She volunteered at a daycare years ago. Someone remembers giving her that photograph to take care of. Her niece, if she's still around, might know more. Eddie felt gratitude then confusion. "So it's solved," he said. "Not yet," Alvarez said. But it's closer. We're following leads back to a meatpacking plant 3 counties away, and we have a woman of interest who used Marlene's name. There's more to this than simple disposal. That week the woman of interest was arrested in a shabby apartment where the detective found a stack of memory boxes, each labeled with names that matched people who disappeared over the last decade. They were carelessly compiled, birthday cards, faded IDs, a catalog of abandoned lives. The woman, who called herself Lucille at first and then Lola, was a tangle of contradictions. She claimed she had only been trying to help people who wanted to disappear, that she arranged burials for those who wanted to vanish quietly. The prosecution argued she had used a system of loneliness to profit or to hide something more calculated. The town followed the trial like a soap opera. Eddie sat in the gallery once, not to see the spectacle but to be present in a small way to the person whose life had been so roughly erased. He found himself thinking of the photograph the lab had found, the child on the swing, and he kept imagining the possible children and drinks of coffee and what ordinary kindness or cruelty might have led to a woman being left in a coffin in a donation pile. The trial didn't give neat answers. Lucille's story fractured under cross-examination. She spoke of a network that never proved to exist, of people who wanted to be taken off the map, of men who paid cash and then didn't ask questions. The jury could not agree on everything, but they found her guilty on charges of illegal burial and disposing of human remains and a lesser charge related to evidence tampering. Afterward, people kept asking Eddie what it felt like to find a coffin, to see a face. He would answer the same way he always did. It's like finding a story in a place where people throw away stories. I didn't want to be the one to open it, he'd say, and people nodded like it made sense. But in the quiet of his kitchen, he would say the name Marlene aloud like a prayer and wonder where she'd like to sit on Sundays, what song she'd hummed while sweeping a diner floor. Months later the county held a small service, a modest bench with a plaque at a public garden, and they used the name Marlene Casper because a name is the smallest, truest mercy. People who had only known gossip came to stand in the rain, to feel that they had done something to turn an erased life toward some small light. Eddie rubbed his palms together to keep warm and watched a woman place a bouquet that looked like it had been picked from a grocery store at the base of the bench. When the crowd thinned, he noticed something in the gravel, the corner of a photograph half buried, curled from damp. He picked it up and saw the same little girl swinging, hair in pigtails, a smear of sun across her cheek. It was the same photo from the lab. Eddie felt the world tilt. The photograph had traveled a long way, through hands, through lies, and now back here like a message in a bottle. He kept the photograph. He kept thinking about thresholds, about the small courage it takes to lift a lid on something people would rather not think about. He had broken a rule and been glad he did. The city still smelled the same the next morning. Truck wheels still sang on pavement. But Eddie's rhythm had shifted. He had walked through a silence and come out with a name. Sometimes he still dreamed of the transfer pile and the coffin, but the dreams had less of the edge of accusation. They had faces that stayed in frames. A woman who liked black coffee, a little girl on a swing, a detective with patient eyes. The town kept its secrets as towns do, but it had also made space for a life that would not be lost without a footprint. That small victory was not cinematic, it was simply human. On a random Tuesday months after the coffin, Eddie found a small envelope in his locker. Inside was a short note, "Thank you for opening the lid." No signature. His chest folded for a second and then smoothed. That note, anonymous and thin, felt like the only proper ending he'd been waiting for. Someone had noticed that his curiosity had been a kind of kindness. He folded the photograph and slipped it inside the note, then tucked both into his wallet. They were small things but they were tangible. He kept it safe.